You are listening to Salty Believer Unscripted, a conversation on Christian ministry and the Christian life.
This is Salty Believer Unscripted. I'm Josiah Walker.
I'm Bryan Catherman.
And on today's episode, I want to talk about sharpening the saw for a pastor, continuing to learn. You know, we talked on a previous episode about how I'm graduating seminary.
Yeah, you're graduating.
And I'm trying to figure out how to fill my time now that I'm not like reading and writing discussion board posts and papers and all that kind of thing. So I want to ask you, how do you kind of like sharpen your saw? What is the daily, regiment that you carry?
Definitely keep reading. But okay, that's a good.
Do you read a systematic theology book every day?
Okay, so here's I'll tell you what I did, but I saw something recently that I want to bring up. Okay. That I'm going to try, and I've started it, and it's fantastic.
Okay.
What I did was I had a stacks of books that I wanted to read from when I was in seminary, or somebody recommended something,
right? And
I would try to mix it up.
Okay.
Because I mean, there were seasons when I'm like, wow, I really wanted to read all these books, and I read like 9 preaching books in a row, and then I'm like, whoa, I'm bogged down, and okay, now I feel like I need to jump into something else. So then I started switching and going, okay, I really wanted to read that book on biblical theology, and then I want to read that Christian history book, and then I'm going to read this Puritan over here, and then and so what I was doing was just kind of mixing up my book reading and just reading them as I had time, and I had a regular routine. Almost every day I'd be in my book, at the end of the day or whatever, and that was pretty good for a while. But then I was feeling like, well, while I'm in this book, I really have a desire to think more on that. So I started reading, I'd read 2 or 3 books kind of at the same time. So I would recommend this for people, and I just picked my new one. I have my Sunday afternoon reading book.
Interesting.
And I only read it on Sunday afternoon, so that I actually kind of have a desire to get back to it. Because usually Sunday afternoon I'm kind of like, okay, church is done, blah, I've taken a nap, but now what? And so it's nice to go, good, I get to pick up this good book that I like, that can be read. Don't do that with like a novel and a week goes by. Sure. But this chapter. So recently, that's how I read The Toxic War on Masculinity, which was good. It was a pretty good book. Yeah. I didn't love the ending, but I thought that was good. But I really love, and I need to talk about it on the website or something. I need to write a review. I really love Strange New World by Carl Trueman. Yeah. But I read a chapter of that. So I ordered it during the Radius Missions Conference we watched, which was, months ago, right?
Sure, yeah. That was the summer.
That was in the summer. But I only read a chapter, at a time every Sunday. So I was looking forward to it, and then I could think about it all week, and I could process it. And it was just a really good, totally different than my regular ministry book. So I would recommend that to anybody who
I like that idea of having a one day a week. This is when I read this book.
Yeah, and I like that book. Just mostly for Sunday afternoons, and it has nothing to do with ministry work for me. Like, if you notice, both those books are just cultural books. Or you read a history book, or you read a biography. That way you're not like, I need to be thinking more about church work on Sunday afternoon.
So then, throughout the rest of the week, do you just spend 8 hours every day just reading the Bible nonstop?
Yes, definitely, no. But no, so
do you have 4 or 5 books that you're going through every day? So here's what I'm doing. Obviously,
read the Bible. As a pastor, as anybody in ministry, you should be reading the Bible every day.
How many times a year do you read through the Bible?
Twice at least. Plus, that doesn't include any of the stuff I'm doing for study or we're preparing our sermon.
That's just purely devotional.
Correct. Just every day. And so I use a couple different plans. I use a chronological plan. These go at the same time. And right now I'm using the McChain plan.
Yeah.
But the guy I want to talk about just reads from different sections. But if that's the work you do, you better know the Bible. So you need to go through it. So then I'll also read whole books in preparation for sermon preaching, or I'll go on a retreat day, and I'll go, today I'm going to read, and I'll read. There's some real value in reading entire books of the Bible in one sitting. In fact, I'm scheduled in December. I'm going to read all the book of Acts.
Okay.
In a one sitting in just a day.
Yeah.
That's beyond the devotional reading plus the study. So anyway, but if that's the tools you work in, know the tool.
Right.
Right. So I read the Bible. And then I like to have some kind of a devotional. That's usually what I start with. I wish I could say I started with the Bible, but I have to wake up.
I'm with you there.
Drink a cup of coffee. Yeah. So I use Table Talk for that.
So maybe a little lighter devotional, something that's not too intense.
And it just sort of feeds. Yeah. It just so I'll read
the wheels turning.
Here's the day for Table Talk magazine, and then here's an article. And I read probably 2 of the articles a week, and that gets me through them all. Plus the daily thing.
Okay.
I'm kicking around the idea of, instead of doing, I like Table Talk, either adding to or using maybe going through one of the old classics,
Daily Reflections by J.C. Ryle.
Any one of these, right? I thought about that. But anyway, so I have a devotional type reading, and then I usually will read like a chapter of whatever book I'm reading and then kind of work into my day.
After
I've read the Bible.
Within a certain theme, like a historical book a theology book, Puritan
No.
book?
This is just when I'm picking but now I'm changing that.
Okay.
So I was like, I'm reading this. Well, what I noticed, though, is there's gaps and there's some value in thinking about different things, having your mind kind of just constantly refreshed and renewed. So there's a guy, I got to get this guy on our podcast, named Chad Vegas.
Chad Vegas. Okay.
Chad Vegas, I know you're not listening because you're too busy. But if you were, we would love to have you on the podcast. We could talk about whatever you want.
Kevin DeYoung's thinking about it. We've emailed him. Just waiting on a response.
We haven't heard back.
Also waiting on a response is Chick-fil-A as our sponsor. So just let you know those two things are in the works.
What are you saying? Are you saying I'm over-promising an awful lot?
I'm just saying there's a lot in motion. Things are turning. Just want you to know,
Here's
Chad.
the deal. You're going to eat your words if I get Chad on here.
No, I'd be excited to have him.
No, so Chad, I didn't know who...
He's a pastor, right? California or something?
He's a pastor in California, and he works quite a bit in missional stuff. He's working on that new missions conference and part of the documentary stuff. I didn't know he was because he just wasn't kind of in the circles that I'm running in. And he preached a phenomenal sermon at the Radius Conference through biblical theology. That. So much so that the other people at our church, because we streamed it, we're watching, they're still talking about, I want to know the Bible like... That's the standard. I want to know the Bible like Chad Vegas. That's what some of the people at our church say. And that's a good standard, right? Like that guy, just biblical theology, crushed it. Anyway, it was awesome. So anyway, I didn't know anything about him, so I'm like, who is this guy? So I was kind of looking him up, and... Then I found him on Facebook. Yeah. Very rarely do I go out and follow somebody, especially celebrity somebodies who don't know me in real life. That's not my... I don't love that.
I actually sent him a friend request today because you're friends with him on Facebook.
No, seriously, I was like, I kind of just think this... So he's
going to get bombarded with requests now based on our podcast.
Well, he's going to come on the podcast, and we just got to get him here. He's going to change our world.
But he posted the other day on Facebook his routine.
I see what you're doing. You're getting us back on track.
And I got it in front of me here.
Read this for us.
So check this out.
I saw this. It was like I stopped what I was doing, and I'll tell you what I've done in response to this.
So this is kind of what he says that he does academically every day to just sharpen his thinking.
Now, he said academically, but I don't think he meant like because I'm teaching in a seminary.
Just disciplines, right?
Yeah, disciplines.
So he says he spends daily exercises in Greek and Hebrew. Just working
I do that too. Right? I forgot to mention. I do the daily dose of Greek with Dr. Plummer, which is really helpful. But anyway, go ahead. 2,
he says he reads a couple pages of a systematic theology book every day. Just 2 or 3 pages. Just work through it. He says start with the old dead guys.
Yep.
Calvin's Institutes, something like that. 3, he spends daily reading in biblical theology, trying to continue learning through that. Lots of resources, he says there.
Yeah, he shares a lot of good stuff. It's a good post.
4, he spends daily reading in church history. All these books, he says, he just reads like a page or two, 3 pages.
Yeah.
You're chipping away at it, right?
Yep, and that's what he said. Like, you get a lot done, but here's the thing. You're thinking about, it just kind of gets the thought processes in that particular area flowing.
Which is helpful, because I just spent time through seminary reading like 70 pages of a theology book a week. I'd like to just spend a couple of
So what else is he goes? He's got a lot. He's got a big
daily
list.
reading in philosophy and apologetics. A daily reading through the Bible. He says he reads through a variety of sections, kind of like you're doing with the McChaney plan. Law, prophets, Psalms, Proverbs, Gospels, Acts, Epistles. He tries to do a chapter from each of those every day.
He does, about 6, 7, 8 chapters a day, probably.
That's intense. That's a lot. And then
it's really not that bad, though. Honestly, so the other thing I didn't mention is I listen. I use dwell, and I listen while I'm reading, and that really helps it solidify it. So you do that. It takes 20 minutes to do 4. Probably takes...
So what are we talking here? Maybe an hour?
He's probably putting an hour into that, I'm guessing.
And then number 7, he rounds it out with, I think, the most important thing in his list. He says, through all these studies and everything I'm reading, I pray through these things.
Man, I forgot to say a prayer because he's more holy than me for sure. But yeah, I pray too, but I didn't even mention it.
And he says sometimes he even writes out his prayers. I know you kind of keep a prayer journal and you kind of write short things.
Yeah, but I don't pray through my readings. I pray through the biblical reading. After I read the Bible, I stop. I spend some time praying. I never thought... I should stop and spend some time praying after this.
How does this doctrine affect my life or my church?
No, it struck me so profoundly, that I went back and so I did. Even this morning, I did this. So I now have, I got some bookmarks. I just have a pile of old bookmarks. Yeah. So you buy certain books, there was a season when people would send books, or we have bookmarks.
I usually use my business cards as a bookmark because nobody wants those anymore.
So I grabbed some bookmarks and I grabbed some books off the shelf here. And I had some at my house in the different genres that I'm very interested in. Yeah. And then I can just kind of keep those genres. I made this stack of books right on my desk next to my Bible.
Do you carry it with you everywhere? Or is this just
no,
you got a station at home?
I have a little spot at home where my Bible, prayer book, and stuff are. My phone charger's in a little drawer. Well, it has like another little shelf on the bottom. Like, I got room. So I took some books, and there's books that have been on my I want to read list. So I have been dabbling in philosophy. I've kind of been enjoying philosophy and some apologetic stuff. So Adam Groza wrote a book. I believe it's called Untangling Philosophy. I think it's like a textbook, but I kind of wanted to read it because I know Groza.
Sure.
He's been on the podcast, I think.
Of course he has.
Has he been on the podcast?
Hasn't everyone?
Hey, if Adam Groza hasn't been on the podcast, we can have him and Chad Vegas on the podcast. Anyway, so I put that book there, read a couple pages, put a bookmark in it. Yeah. I have the Creeds and Confessions book that's on my list. So that's kind of a historical Creeds and Confessions. I forgot the name of the Puritan. I think his name starts with a V, actually. I just started. But he is going through, it's a Puritan book that goes through the Westminster Shorter Catechism.
Nice.
So it's like, here's the question, then here's a bunch of his questions.
Okay.
I just decided I'm going to deal with a question a week, plus his commentary on it. It's a Puritan.
Yeah.
Stuck that on my pile. And then in accordance, which I use that, when you open up certain books, it'll kind of remember where you're at. So I decided I'm going through Calvin's commentaries, or Calvin's Institutes. And so like I can scroll through and read, and when I close it, it remembers where I was. So when I open it back up, it's open there.
Would you add a biography to this?
I have a biography that's on my Kindle.
Okay.
And I already owned it, and I got it on sale. And since I'm doing Calvin's Institutes, I decided to do the Steve Lawson series of like Giants of the Faith Calvin book.
Nice.
So I'm going to be reading that. But I'm going to read that in the evening. I decided I don't want to do 2 pages of that. I want to do whole chapters.
That's something I've always struggled with, where I'm wanting to read something good at night, right? I want to read, but my brain is just fried. And I want something that's edifying, but that's not going to cause me to just sit there and think all night.
Right. So I decided, that's going to be my evening reading.
Okay.
Which I think is going to be good. And then I have my Bible reading, and so I'm still going to just keep going through that. I'm doing the Daily Dose of Greek, and I decided So I love that. Dr. Plummer goes through things. But I decided I'm actually going to go through another 2 or 3 Greek verses. And then Daniel, my son, who's homeschooled, wants to do biblical languages. We'll probably start working on Hebrew together. So I'm kind of waiting on that.
Yeah.
But we'll pick that up and I'll add to it. And here's the deal. I thought about it. I'm like, if you're spending an hour a day in this, I realize that seems like a lot. But especially if you're a pastor.
Right.
But if you could put this out and do 20, 30 minutes a day, think about how beneficial that would be. It'd be really helpful, right? And I've still got the table talk thing going.
Yeah, and I love the variety of it, too, because you started at the beginning of this podcast talking about just, like, getting soaked in preaching or a certain topic.
Just bombing
and then you just burned out on it, right?
Yep.
Versus kind of just sharpening every aspect of your saw.
You know what else is helpful is I didn't even think about this, and Chad Vegas didn't talk about it, but we could ask him on the podcast about having a routine of podcasts. Because I found it's really helpful to listen to preachers talk.
Yes.
I've started listening to pastors talk. So one of them is the Simeon Trust guys, one of them is the 9 Marks guys. Okay. And then I have a small other sort of some sermons, because I listen to a few sermons as part of this too. But
Salty Believer's a great one.
I listen to the sermons when I'm driving.
Sure.
Right? So I think just finding all the little pockets of your day to stick these things.
Because I think that's what we don't realize. We spend so much time just death scrolling, right?
Yep.
We're death scrolling through things. But if we took that time and listened to a podcast, or you're stuck in traffic, I find myself when I'm in traffic just flipping through the radio, right?
Yep. And then you just get questions and songs, and then you get to your destination. How much value did it provide?
No, it just almost made it feel more cumbersome. And sometimes you even listen to the Bible in the car.
Oh, a lot. I put my. That's why that Dwell app just picks up.
Well, the Dwell app's great, but I even went so old school as to get the Bible on CD, so I could just stick the CD in, not have to think about it.
I had a car years ago that had like a CD type changer MP3 player, so I had bought an audio version Bible on MP3 files and then ripped them all. So I had the entire Bible on a changer, and it would just always went. Yeah. Well, one day I drove down to my seminars. Was that where I went? Yeah,
you went to seminary. When you were in seminary, I think you said you went down to California.
Well, that was for my doctoral work. Yeah. So I was going down my doctoral seminars, and it's like you got a 10-hour drive.
Sure.
Okay, so the Bible takes about 70 hours to read, but the New Testament I can't remember. But I'm like, man, I listened to all this on the way down, and all this. I got back, I felt like I had so much Bible in me, and then when I got there too, that was really funny because another guy, friend of mine, listened to The Martian on the airplane, which is like, okay, and I had listened to 10 hours of the Bible, and he's like, wow.
What was a
I
better
probably
use of
could have
time?
used my time a little better.
As we're kind of wrapping up here, I want to talk about, this all looks great on paper, and it sounds amazing, and I hear it, and I go, yeah, I want to do that too. When the rubber hits the road, and you're kind of looking at reality, what happens? Do you have mornings where you're like, man, I just want to sleep in? Or, oh, somebody calls, or I've got a morning meeting?
Oh,
or
yeah.
Do you ever just feel rushed? Or are there ever days where you only get through half your list? What happens in this?
I only started doing all that other book stuff with the bookmarks a few days ago, but I've prioritized my reading.
Okay.
So the Bible, for me, is always, if I'm going to be short on time, right? So if I'm going to be short, I'm going to pick up and put out one chapter of the Bible and then try to come back to my list later, or two. I try to make sure I'm doing something. If I'm not too short on time, I'll read the Table Talk and then the Bible. And then I start to, it just depends on how much time I have. The rest of those books I can come back to.
Sure.
And I've even prioritized those books. If I'm short on time, the philosophy book is going to be, I can get through the catechism and the Institute section a little bit, page or two.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Go through a catechism question.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm doing with the shorter catechism. Or you can do the New City Catechism, but just do that a week. Whatever. I try to prioritize even the stack. So, because there are just days. You get up and you're like, oh, this is going on or that's going on. Or I think the goal is not to beat yourself up, not to kill yourself over this. I stopped using, I printed a list for my Bible reading instead of doing the ones that just give me on this day you read this. Because then I don't if I want to read more, there are days, my day off, I read more.
I have a similar list where it's just numbered.
Yep.
So it's not January 1st, January 2nd. It's 256, 253.
Yeah, and then I'll actually try to do a little extra on my day off.
Yeah.
Right, I have a little extra time, or maybe if I do my PRD, I'm going to read for 2 hours and do whatever.
That's good to know, because sometimes you and I are going through the same plan, and you're kind of where I am, and then all of a sudden you're way ahead of me. I'm like, what did you do?
Because if I have the time, so when I'm short on time, it's tough. But if I have the time, that should be a two-way street. I'm going to give more to it when I have the time, and if I don't have the time, that's okay.
Yeah. Interesting.
Now, we just shared something, though, that's like, if you have an hour of your reading time, but I think it's helpful if you only have 15 minutes, prioritize a chapter of the Bible, and we do the New City Catechism at Redeeming Life Church. You could pick up a catechism. I've just been doing videos. I say we do it. You do the kids' Find a little something that you can just regularly do. Table Talk Magazine is really good for that.
And it's finding those pockets of time, right? I struggle because I put apps on my phone, but then I still find myself going to Facebook or social media rather than pulling out a Kindle book.
Just the death scroll, right?
There
should be a setting on there or on your phone that if you scroll a certain amount of distance, like if you scroll 3 of these at a time, a bell's going to go off on your phone.
I need parental locks on half my apps.
Yeah.
So,
no, it's hard because
for the week.
I think it just, somebody said it's the guy, I think it's the guy who invented Facebook, or it's the guy who did, one of these guys was before Congress saying if you have a bottomless scroll where you never have to click more, it's like the cup that the waiter or waitress comes around and keeps filling up, and you never know how much you actually drank because it feels like that, and so you just got to get rid of the cup.
Absolutely. And that's what you've done, that you've told me in private that you didn't not say on this podcast, is you made a commitment to yourself. I'm not going to pick up my phone in the morning till I've read my Bible.
Which I should probably clarify, because if my wife's listening, I pick up my phone and I stick it on the charger, and I hit the Dwell app.
Okay.
So I am using my phone.
Well, you went through a season where you were going straight to news.
Oh man, while I'm getting the coffee going.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, what's going on? Did the world implode last night? And then I'm in the death scroll.
Yeah.
Even in news and stuff. Even like in so I get the 1440, you just get an email with the highlight news, with just links. But I would start clicking on more and more and more of those links. I'm like, I have got to just get into the Word of God first and prioritize God's Word from my worldview before I'm going to news and everything else that shapes me.
I love it.
You have to do that, because if you don't, man, you're a slave to this stuff.
Right. And you just start out feeling terrible because of the war that's broken out or this, that, the other.
Yeah. And then
versus just being edified by the Word of God.
It's really fascinating when you read God's Word and then the news comes up and then God's Word speaking back to you about stuff, and you're like, oh, okay.
Or how often have you had a counseling appointment that whatever you read that morning spoke into
so much
that situation?
I mean, just so, and wow, that God had God had that all worked out for me.
God's got the whole thing rigged.
That's right.
This has been super encouraging. Now that I'm done with seminary, I'm really looking forward to kind of getting a routine like this down.
We'll talk to Chad about we'll talk
looking forward to having him, Kevin DeYoung, lots of other guys.
You're just making fun of me. What are you going to do if we get Chad
Dr. Orch will be on the podcast talking about his retirement from Gateway
He's
Seminary.
been on this podcast before.
But I didn't get to interview him, so.
That's true. He's been on a couple. Dude, one time, sorry, total rabbit trail. Me, Jared, I can't remember who else was with us. There was like 3 of us. We're doing a podcast with him, and he was calling in. And back then, we didn't have Zoom.
Sure.
We had the telephone kind of wired up next to the little recorder deal. And we were in a church building we were using, and the fire alarm went off, and the fire trucks pulled up, and right in the middle of our podcast with Jeff Orch, we had to evacuate the building. He said, that's never happened before. That's what he said. Never had that happen before.
I was really encouraged because I heard pastors talk the other day and you could hear a fire truck in the background.
Dude, I know.
I was
right?
like, great. It's not just me. Other people have background.
Well,
I'm always thinking people are in these big studios that are soundproof.
I remember talking to one guy he was an author. I can't remember who it was now. And a train was going by. And he's like, just hang tight. And the train went by.
Well, this train is definitely derailed. We're over on time. What? So, I will say this.
Yep, train wreck.
As our listeners are holding their breath, waiting for these people who are way too qualified to be on our podcast, join our podcast. If you've got a book that you read as part of your daily reading or something you'd recommend or a system you'd recommend, drop us a line, let us know. We'll talk about it on the podcast. Maybe we'll even have you on the podcast.
Yes, just random stranger guest.
Random guy.
Email us. Yeah. With some interesting topic we could talk about. What's the email again?
Yeah, our email is saltybeliever@gmail.com, and just put random guy in the subject.
Oh, I'm terrified.
And we'll keep an eye out. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. Salty Believer Unscripted is a production of SaltyBeliever.com. Visit the website to find more resources, like the podcast you've just listened to.